My name is Connie Lester. It is October 29th, 2020. With me are Brandon Kirk, Evan Simica, and Jonathan Koch. We are conducting this oral history via Zoom due to the COVID-19 pandemic. We are interviewing Demetrius Summerville.
Hi, I'm Brandon Kirk, and I'm a senior ECF through the history program. And I'd like to begin, Mr. Summerville, asking you, what is your current position? And if you could describe the work that you have done currently in the Holden Paramore area of Orlando.
Hey, good afternoon, Mr. Kirk or Brandon. Thank you again for having me. My current position is Director of Community Engagement for the Edward E. Haddock Jr. Family Foundation. My work in the community of Holden and Paramore has been a bit complex, and I'll do my best to try to simplify that for our time. So in 2010, my wife and I, we read a report on Orlando that highlighted the 100 most distressed communities in the Orlando metropolitan area. And the Holden Paramore community was one of the most distressed community. There was a void, we realized that there was a void of resources and leadership in the community as a result of desegregation, believe it or not. So when Paramore was thriving, there were leaders in the community, pastors, teachers, lawyers, doctors that lived in this community. But after desegregation happened, a lot of those families who had means were able to leave the community and purchase larger plots of land, build homes, things of that nature, and moved outside of Paramore and Holden. And with that came a power vacuum, and kind of led to some of the distress indicators in our community. So my wife and I, we decided to move into the neighborhood in 2010 and to be a part of the fabric of the community and be a connected neighbor, connecting those in the community to those outside of the community. In 2014, a friend of mine of 3 years at the time, he's the president of the Haddock Family Foundation. He asked me to join their team and specifically oversee a newly acquired asset named Cayley Square, which is an old Nazarene church that was previously run. There was a nonprofit that was run out of that place, but they had previously closed down their doors. And so there's this beautiful asset in the middle of the Holden Heights community, which is just south of Paramore, that this foundation now oversaw and had in their possession. So with that, we did, when I was hired on, we did an asset map. We listened to the community, I think we did about 540 surveys in the neighborhood and asked questions like, what do you love about your community? What do you not like? What do you want to see happen in your community? And what are you willing to do about it? And from there, we founded Cayley Square, and we developed a mission based on that feedback we got from the community. And so the work I did in the community at Cayley Square in particular, this was the vision of that work, to see the residents of Holden Heights in Orlando flourishing by living with dignity, hope, and purpose. And our mission is to cultivate a place of hope, connection, and growth that equips our residents to flourish. And so that was kind of the broad, those were our marching orders, and the community helped get us to that point. And what did we do? What kind of work did we do out of Cayley Square and in the community? Several things. We used the facility for open gym nights in the community so we can get to know the young people, and they had time, 3 hours every Thursday night where they could be off the streets. And that led to a potential partnership with the Paramore Kids Zone to provide academic support and after-school activities for our young people in line with what the community said they wanted to see, which were youth activities. We value collaboration, so we invited several organizations doing good in our community, other nonprofits, to not just in our community, but also in the city of Orlando, to bring out their operations team and call Cayley Square home, because we have over 25,000 square feet of space, and we wanted to utilize it in the best way possible. Uh, I also established a group mentoring program called the Young Overcomers Club that served to equip our young people with skills to overcome internal and external barriers to their success. Uh, that's kind of what I did leading up into 2020. So in June of 2020, I kind of oversaw all of that. And and in July, I transitioned to full-time with the Haddock Family Foundation to work on some of the projects that it works on a larger scale around the country and around the world. But currently at Cayley Square is still up and running. And we have learning pods at the site right now. Due to COVID, some of our families chose to keep their kids at home from school. And so we, in partnership with the Paramore Kids Zone, have learning pods every day for students to come and have a safe place to learn and do school. And we also have after school activities. We've held career fairs for our youth where we have for 2 or 3 years in a row where we invited professionals from the community to come out and just share with them, our students, their careers and then pathways into that particular field of study or vocation. We hosted community meetings and seminars. The most recent one we had, the last one we had, was a large community event in partnership with Valencia's Peace and Justice Institute on the healing of community trauma. And so we've done a lot in our community and continuing to do a lot, even though my role has kind of shifted a little bit from that place, but it still falls within my purview.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
Good afternoon, Mr. Summerville. My name is Ethan Sameka, and I'm a senior at UCF majoring in history. It's very nice to be able to speak with you this afternoon.
Hey, thanks. Glad you're here.
Of course. So I must ask you, how have the people served by the Cayley Square Project and others living in the Holt and Palmer area, how have they been affected by COVID-19 pandemic?
It's a good question. I would say that our young people have struggled tremendously, in particular, and as well as the families. There's been a level of the unemployment rate was already high in our community, but a lot of our young people and even some of their parents lost jobs during this pandemic, which has led to a lot of hopelessness, isolation, depression, some mental health challenges due to the lack of just physical connection and even meaningful work. And there's also been a stint of violence in our community as well over the last 7 or 8 months. There's a level of apathy, I would say, in our community, increased substance abuse and use. Not sure if it's on the rise or not in other communities or in our community in particular, but I know that sexual and physical abuse is present in our community, and we're not sure just yet how prevalent that is because, of course, everybody is still isolated, so we can't really gather the real data from that because a lot of kids are being held at home. And so that's in part why Cayley Square, we wanted to open our doors so that we have open our doors for learning pods so that we have safe places for our kids to come and be with adults who care about them and provide a safe place for them to learn and grow.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Good afternoon, Mr. Somerville. My name is Jonathan. I am a secondary education major. My question to you is, what has been the relationship between the Cayley Square Project and the Black Lives Matter movement?
Thanks for that question, Jonathan. Cayley Square currently does not have a formal relationship or connection to the local Black Lives Matter movement. As you know, they're kind of decentralized movements across the country. And that's not intentional at all. Just given our vision and mission at Cayley Square, we've been doing the work of providing youth activities and safe streets for our community and living out some of the core tenets of the Black Lives Matter movement to, in a sense, just by existing. So we're not formally connected, but we are doing some of the work to address the issues that the Black Lives Matter movement seeks to address in our community. So I would say, for example, in 2018 and in 2019, we hosted a Know Your Rights seminar um, for our young people and even their parents. And we brought in local attorneys and professors in law, family law, to come and educate our young people on how to interact with law enforcement in a manner that helps them make it home to their families. We talk with them about their rights and privileges that are afforded to every citizen um, as it relates to engaging with law enforcement. At the same time, we tried to impart wisdom into our young people to know how to navigate those situations when some law enforcement, they don't respect the rights of everybody, as we see. We've even had local sheriff deputies meet with our youth and just encourage them, build relationships, and talk with them. So I would say that's the long answer to your question, but we have been actively pursuing activities and building bridges and relationships that can help mitigate some of the negative effects, especially negative interactions with law enforcement in our community.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So I have a follow-up question. You mentioned your surveys in the community and like the strengths of the community. So what are the community assets in Holden Heights and how can they be used?
It's a great question. There are lots of assets in the community. In particular, there are some seniors in the community who are retired educators. So when they have time to impart wisdom and education to the next generation, if given the opportunity and platform to do so, or if they want to do that. Voice, some of the assets in our communities that our people, we have a voice, and it's oftentimes not heard until there's instances of injustice or violence or something like that, where our voice is usually is raised to get the attention of others. So we have voices. Potential is another asset that we have in our community. There are lots of obstacles and barriers that can help, that prevent people from realizing their full potential in our community, and even not just realize it, but harness it and utilize it in a way to benefit others and their families. So I would say those are three: time, voice, and potential are some assets. And then there are also physical assets in our community. There's a lot of vacant parcels in our community that could serve as affordable housing units, and so there's potential there to create avenues for home ownership. Over 70% of the people in our community rent, and as you know, if you rent a house, or the owner can sell it out from under you, and you're homeless and you have no recourse, and there's no wealth that can be passed on to the next generation through the sale of that property. So there could be there's land where affordable housing opportunities can be presented to families who wish to own their own homes. And then, of course, there's a couple of assets, physical assets, like Cayley Square being one, and then Grand Avenue School, which is a historic building, is being repurposed right now to be a recreation center and a learning center for our community in the Holden Paramore area. So there's some assets that could be deployed for good and to solve some of the problems that we're facing in our community.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Since we're discussing about some of the issues that Holden Paramore faces, I want to ask you, what do you see the problems that Holden Paramore, the area itself, faces? And what role do you think that the police department, the social workers, and the general city services, what do you think they play in addressing those issues?
Yes, thanks, Ethan. There's several problems, and I think some of these are, the first two problems I'll list are at a deeper level. not just kind of not what you can see when you drive through our neighborhood, but there's a level of hopelessness in our community, and that's been exacerbated by the current pandemic that we're in. There's nihilism. If you're familiar with, going back to your, your early on philosophy classes, first year, second year, nihilism is really rampant in our community. And a philosopher and professor at Princeton I admire and read a lot of his work, Cornel West, speaks of the nihilism that's increasingly pervading the Black community. And he defines that nihilism as kind of a lived experience of coping with life, a life of horrifying meaninglessness, hopelessness, and most important, lovelessness. So there's this kind of throw caution to the wind kind of mindset, especially in our young people, where they don't care about voting, they don't care about anything if it doesn't make them, if it doesn't mean anything to them personally. So that's a problem. There is also community trauma. A few weeks ago, a young man was found hanging in a tree in Barker Park near Cayley Square. And that young man, Nevin Baker, used to come to Cayley Square and would come to our basketball nights and our young overcomers meetings. He was 22 years old. And I spoke with him this summer. He was working and doing well. But, and that the results of that finding, when they did the investigation, it was concluded that it was a death by his own hand, meaning suicide. He did it to himself. And a lot of people in the community and the family seem to think otherwise. But I bring that up to say that there's that image, the image of this young Black man hanging in a tree, conjured a community trauma that has expanded, spanned generations now, going back to the most notable one, the Ocoee Massacre. We're in 100 years. And this year, November 8th, not celebrates, but commemorates the 100-year mark of the Ocoee Massacre, where July Perry was lynched in Orlando. So community trauma is a problem that we face. There's aggression and violence in our community, within our community, and as well as inflicted upon our community, whether it's physical violence, emotional, sexual, just very passive aggressive violence that is experienced in our community. So those are a few of the problems that I see, and I'm sure there are more that could be mined, but for our conversation, those are the ones I see. It's interesting that the follow-up question to that revolves around the roles that people play outside of our community to solve the problems within our community. And I'm a firm believer that the people closest to the problem are the ones closest to the solution. This may not be received well in a lot of spaces, but I believe each person, no matter how bad your situation is, you have some power to affect your own situation for better. The problems in our community are vast and deeply entrenched and sometimes generational, and it requires a lot of work to overcome the generational problems in our community. And sometimes it requires bridges to be built. So what I mean by that is the problems that we face in our community should be approached from two different perspectives. You build a bridge from the community, the residents taking ownership of their lives individually and figuring out how am I contributing to the problems in my community and what can I do to be a part of the solution. And then also it takes the police and social workers and government officials and businesses to say, hey, how are we contributing to the problems within this community? And let's come together and sit on the same side of the table and put the problems on the other side of the table and work together to solve those problems. And I believe that that's what that's one way in which we could address the issues and problems that we face in our community, in communities like ours, by doing some self-exploration first and working on ourselves first, and then moving out to invite others to do the same and come join us in the work of addressing the problems.
Okay, thank you for your response, Mr. Somerville.
You're welcome, Ethan.
Hi, this is Jonathan again. My question is, how can the greater Orlando community engage with Holden Paramore to create dialogues of understanding?
That's a great question. I think the greater Orlando community can engage by learning our shared history, doing what you guys are doing, and the UCF, the history department, is doing is capturing our story and helping helping the residents to learn that story, and not just see it from the European American perspective, but also see it from the Native American perspective and the African American perspective, and then realize that there are two versions of America that we live in. One is the majority culture that the majority culture sees and experiences, and then there's the other that the people of color and minorities we see and experience, and figuring out a way to learn what each other sees and see if we can have a one view, one shared common history and common story. So I think getting a greater understanding of our history is one way to engage. Another way, practically speaking, for the greater Orlando community to engage with Holden and Paramore is by identifying and supporting organizations and people on the ground currently who are doing the work to address some of their problems. Connect with those organizations and ask, if your time, your talent, and your resources could be used in their work. And if so, figure out the combination of the three that suits you and suits them, and join in the work. And don't feel the pressure to try to start something new. But I do believe that it all starts with having a shared understanding of our history, local and nationally, and even internationally. How do we get to this place? And then figuring out who's doing what to address some of the problems that have come from what we've endured and kind of inherited through transatlantic slave trade and slavery and Jim Crow and all the different issues of injustice that we see and experience.
And I have one last question.
Sure.
So, Cayley Square is about 4 blocks from 408 I-4, and I just wanted to see if you had opinion on noise pollution and pollutants from cars and the physical redlining of Griffin
Mhm.
Park Historical District and the subdividing areas.
Oh, yes. It's very interesting that these structures are put in communities, run directly through the heart of communities of color. And yes, there's the noise pollution, the lighting, constant lights being on. There's also just vehicular emissions even.
Mm-hmm.
So it contributes to the environmental piece. There's environmental justice that needs to take place in communities of color. One thing I love about our community is that we have a lot of trees in our community, and that helps to mitigate some of the environmental issues that we face. But it's still unfair that 408 is running right through our community. It was intentionally put there. Mm-hmm. I-4 intentionally put in the middle of our community to run parallel to Division Avenue, run parallel to the train tracks, to physically draw those lines of demarcation, like, hey, you are relegated to this part of the community. Know your place. You're not welcome over here unless you're serving us in some capacity. But Griffin Park, like, I drove by it the other day. It's really saddening to me to see how all the construction is just built up right around that little community.
And it's recent. It's not redlining from 1970. It's
Mhm.
the sixth tier of the I-4 on-ramp was finished in November. And,
Yeah,
you have on-ramps and off-ramps, just, caging it in. It's very recent. It's, still prevalent.
yeah, yes. And that begs the question, why? Why do we allow that to happen? And what are the what can people do when you're in a community like ours where there's a lack of voices, collective voices that will speak out against it. And even if we do speak out against it, there's just powers that are kind of unstoppable. So it's just really unfair, and just one visible uh, marker of the injustice that our community face from without. Not to mitigate or undermine that. I mean, we have our own problems that we contribute to in our community, but we have to address those as well as address the ones that are being
Outside factors,
outside
right?
factors. Yes,
Thank you.
you're welcome.
Okay, if I may, I would like to ask a question. As we talked, there was a question that occurred to me that as an economic historian, one of the things that I see as a problem or a potential problem is the way in which being able to access opportunity is dependent on having good credit scores. You need a good credit score for many jobs. You need a good credit score to be able to move into better housing. You need a good credit score for so many things. And if you're living in a situation where you're renting by the week, you don't have a bank account, or any number of other things, you never establish a credit score. How do you see that affecting your community, and what steps are in place to help address that?
Well, that's a significant issue in our community. And as I think about your question, I think about there's the Central Florida Urban League that's in place that works to help with education and economic viability. And I think it starts with education, educating our community on the like, how does credit work in your favor or against you? But bigger than that, if you don't have a home, like to your point, if you don't have a home, an address where at least you're renting, and you can call that place home, and it's a safe place, and you can establish a line of credit by showing you pay your rent every month on time, that's an issue. And I think it starts literally at home base. We have to have housing that's affordable and accessible to everyone in Orlando. And in our community, rents are really astronomically high for what you pay each month. Whereas if you bought the property, you would pay, sometimes 60% less than what you pay for rent. So that's an issue. But as it relates to your question, kind of, I'll have to think a little bit more about that and figure out how local banks, your Wells Fargo, your SunTrust, your Truist now, all these banks could put together programs to help our people in our community to better understand, but also provide access to checking accounts for our people with no fees. That would be a great solution.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Do you have something you would like to talk about that we didn't ask?
Not at this time.
Okay.
Yeah, this is this is good for me to sit and think and process. Thank you all for your questions and your the work that you're doing. I know you're in school, and part of this is doing it for a grade, but hey, this is meaningful work that will outlive all of us. So thank you for your work.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.